Round one was real good. Now the rematch. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, breaking down the Big 12 championship game. Oklahoma and Baylor. Of course, the Sooners came all the way back from 25 down to win the first game in Waco. We got Jason Ray on the line from Last Word on College Football. But before we dive into the conversation, of course, like, comment, share the videos on social media, and subscribe here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Jason, how you doing today?
Doing great, Mark. It's good to be in the first week of December here. Championship Saturday is upon us, so ready to get started.
That's right. The college football regular season, the shortest in sports, is over. Now we have a few precious games to grasp onto to savor 2019 into 2020, and this one is huge. Oklahoma-Baylor. Based on the first matchup, Jason, what do you take from that game that can apply to the second game? We're only about 3 to 4 weeks removed from that game, not even that. And in regards to Baylor looking so hot out of the gate, and Oklahoma probably much based on experience and facing those type of environments and situations, was able to put together a historic comeback that has enabled them to still stay alive in the college football playoff race.
Yeah, I mean, Mark, you make a good point that the game's only about 3 weeks old. So there's, I don't know if both teams have changed a ton from that game, but I think coming out of the gate, it's probably one of the poorest first half or any half performances of an Oklahoma team in quite some time. They looked very lethargic. Of course, they turned the ball over a couple of times. They did not tackle well. They actually got beat quite a few times in both man and zone coverage in the secondary. Like I said, they didn't tackle well. Charlie Brewer actually ran the ball pretty well in the first half, and of course, the second half was what it was. And I think both teams have gotten better defensively since that game. If I was to put anything, kind of in terms of any particular area where the things have gotten a little bit, either a little bit different, a little bit better. Oklahoma played really well to start the season, first 7 games. Pretty well documented how improved they were. Then they hit a couple of rough spots there against Iowa State, and of course Kansas State, where they gave up 40 points in both of those games. But since the second half of the Baylor game, Oklahoma's only given up 3 touchdowns in those games. 2 against TCU, and then 1 last week against Oklahoma State. So, and then I think likewise for Baylor, Baylor only gave up the 1 score against Kansas, and then they only gave up 1 touchdown, which was very late, I believe, on the last play of the game against Texas. So I think, as it's a far cry from what we've seen in the Big 12 over the last few years. But I think Oklahoma's up to 25th or 26th in total defense in the country, which is, incredible. Coming from where they were last year. And then I think Baylor's in the top 40, around 35 to 40-ish. So I think you'll see a relatively low-scoring game, for Big 12, for Big 12 type games. But I think if I had to say one thing, just what's different, that they're a little bit more physical on defense since that game.
Yeah, I would rather not have to do it manually, but if somebody could give me a spreadsheet in which I could spit out the numbers on conference games alone, because of course the scores are skewed once you step out of conference play, whether you're playing a top-notch team or an FCS team. But within conference play, the Big 12 scores have not been out of control by any stretch. And if anything, I would almost guarantee that they don't have the highest scoring average per game of the Power 5 conferences. The games have been relatively low scoring in the Big 12 and have certainly been under control. And specifically pointing to Oklahoma, as you mentioned, ever since the second half of the Baylor game, the defense has acquitted itself extremely well, giving up just 16 points to Oklahoma State this last time out. a game that a lot of people pointed to based on history, based on rivalry, based on location, that could be an issue with Oklahoma possibly getting upset. I certainly picked it myself. I thought that it certainly could happen. It was 20-16 at one point in the game before Oklahoma sealed it away. But the defense, Chuba Hubbard got his yards in the first half, locked down on him, obviously got out to a 2-3 score lead in which they could play pass defense and focus on that. And if this Oklahoma defensive resurgence in the last couple of weeks carries on, and they've been able to do it against capable teams, then we may have something.
Yeah, in fact, Mark, I actually wrote a piece this morning for Last Word on College Football saying, is this Oklahoma team championship caliber? Do they have a championship caliber defense? I think maybe they're not quite there yet, but I think they're certainly in the conversation. I think this year, it's a conversation that you can actually have this year as compared to previous years. So I think your point's well taken, particularly about how they played against Chuba Hubbard in the second half. I believe he had about 70 yards in the first half and only 30 or so. I think he ended up with 104 yards total. The way Oklahoma State ran the ball and threw the ball well in the first drive, you kind of looked, it's like, oh, okay, is this going to be another 42-38 game, 49-47 type of game? But they settled in. And I think one thing, there's a lot of differences that you can see from Alex Grinch and his staff and the play on the field. But I think the one key difference is they're making adjustments really quickly on the fly. They didn't tackle particularly well in that first, particularly in the first drive against Oklahoma State, but they tackled extremely well. Particularly in the second half, but probably the last three quarters. I think the one thing that makes you a little bit nervous on the defensive side is they're not getting any taller in the secondary. I mean, I think that still could hurt them. And probably a little the only takeaway that you would probably take from that game against Oklahoma State that kind of left you with maybe being a little bit disappointed was Trey Brown, from Oklahoma. He just seems to be in a little bit of a funk right now. He seems to be making some freshman type mistakes. He's not getting a good jam on at the line of scrimmage, and instead of recovering, he seems like he's just grabbing. He's just and he was called for a couple of pass interferences. He's on the season for the secondary penalties. So I think that's something that you concern yourself with. Maybe not necessarily in this game, but should Oklahoma win and whoever they play, whether it's in the Sugar Bowl or they make the playoffs, that's something that would be a pretty big concern for the Sooners.
Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Big 12 championship game up ahead. Not Oklahoma, Texas, as anticipated by most of us preseason, but Baylor 1-11 to 7-6, now to 11-1, and facing Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship game. And the lone loss for the Baylor Bears, of course, an effort which may be more credible to a certain extent, looking at their schedule, giving them a little bit more credit for their one loss than their 11 wins, in that they played Oklahoma down to the wire, losing that game just 31-28. So, Jason, if we compare the Oklahoma offense, and we've made these statements in the past and made these comparisons in regards to the quarterback position, but now that you've got an entire Big 12 schedule, all 9 games to compare from last season and previous seasons to this season, even beyond Jalen Hurts, comparing him to Baker and Kyler, how would you compare the level of production of this Oklahoma offense versus previous editions?
Yeah, so it's very funny, Mark, and it's an intriguing conversation to have, just because when you look at the eye test, just look on the field, they don't seem to have the same explosiveness as they have in the past. But yeah, they're still number one in the country in total offense, and they lead LSU by a slim margin. in terms of yards per play and total yards per game. But I think, and then when you look at Jalen Hurts just on paper, 18 rushing touchdowns. I believe he has 31 or 32, passing score. So he leads. He certainly leads the country from an individual touchdowns accounted for perspective. He has more touchdowns accounted for than Baker Mayfield or Kyler Murray did in either of their 2 seasons. But I think on the field you can see that that the offense is probably not quite as explosive as they have been in the past. I think what you see is Jalen Hurts from time. He's very inconsistent in the pocket. There'll be times where where he's dropping back to pass and he'll stay in the pocket, but he'll go through his progressions very slowly to the point where he'll get sacked or he'll get some pressure. And then there's times where he'll go through them very quickly and go, from the first to the second to third, fourth guy, and then maybe even come back to that first receiver and, stick in the pocket. And then you'll see scenarios where he will, kind of just, he'll get a little, I don't know if it's happy feet, his internal quarterback clock goes off a little bit too soon. He won't stay in the pocket to, give his receivers a little bit more time. So I think that's the only area where you see that, this offense may not be quite as good as they have in the past. But, what you've seen Lincoln Riley go to is a little bit more of a run-heavy strategy over the last couple of weeks. I think they ran probably 70% of the time against Oklahoma State and TCU. Even Mike Gundy kind of made a comment that this was it's certainly a spread offense in a different day and age, but he made the comment that this is a wishbone team, which I think Riley came back and he took that as a compliment. He mentioned that after the Oklahoma State game that that was a compliment just in terms of they're able to attack you from multiple spots on the field, whether it be at the quarterback or the running back position as well. So, and I think and a lot of Oklahoma fans have been kind of hammering for this for the last few games since earlier in the year that, Kennedy Brooks is getting a little bit more involved in the offense. He's had back-to-back 100-yard games. So I think, and I would look for Baylor to kind of deploy more of put more people in the box to try to stop the run and make, Jalen Hurts beat you with his arm, which, that's sometimes easier said than done. But I think last game Baylor's really physical inside, specifically on their defensive line, so they were able to play. They were able to rush 3 and play pretty well against the run. But Jalen Hurts was able to find those receivers, and he threw the ball really well in the second half against Baylor. So it'll be interesting to see how both the Baylor defense and the Oklahoma offense, how they change things up going into this game.
Christmas is coming, folks. Shop Amazon. Use the link in the description section below. You help us build the channel. Got Jason Ray on the line. Last word on college football, as we've got Oklahoma taking on Baylor. And, of course, it was a tale of 2 halves the first time around, and a tremendous comeback from the Sooners from 25 down to pull off a historic comeback in regards to program history comebacks from that 25 down, 28-3 to win it over Baylor in Waco and save their college football playoff chances right then and there. So before we get to those playoff chances, Jason, is there any reason to expect anything different from round 2? Is there anything in particular that you think, okay, well, this should be much better, or this is a concern, or this popped up in the first game that I would expect not to see in game 2?
Well, I don't know that I would not expect it, but I think one thing that needs to happen is what happened last week for Oklahoma, and no turnovers. I think if Oklahoma doesn't turn the ball over, they probably win the game by 10 to 14 points. And it may have been that way earlier in the year, right? In the earlier game, I believe Jalen Hurts fumbled the ball twice, threw an interception in the early in the first half, which was nearly a pick six. So I think that's the difference is if Oklahoma is able to take care of the ball and they tackle as well as they did have the last few games, certainly in the second half, I think that can be a key difference in this game. Now, if Oklahoma turns the ball over and is not able to run the ball consistently, and Baylor has the opportunity to kind of sit back in coverage and get Jalen Hurts and some in the Oklahoma offense into some predictable third and long situations, I think that could be detrimental to their chances. And we could be looking at another another one possession 3-point game should some of those things happen.
Please like, comment, share the videos on social media, and subscribe right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Jason Ray on the line from Last Word on College Football.